You're watching PM Agenda. We'll bring you my interview with the Greens leader Christine Milnes shortly. First to outgoing Labor Senator Mark Bishop. He's taken a parting swipe at Labor's handling of the carbon and mining taxes. He's described Kevin Rudd's decision to unwind the Howard government's policies on asylum seekers as terrible as well. And he's urging his fellow senators to respect the government's mandate when it comes to voting on key policies. Quite a list of grievances from Mark Bishop as he heads to the exit door amongst a number of senators whose term wraps up in a couple of weeks before the new Senate takes its place from July 1. Sky News political reporter David Lipson spoke to Senator Mark Bishop a little earlier.
Senator Mark Bishop, thanks for your time. In your time in the Senate, we've seen all sorts of fortunes of the Labor Party, if you like. In 2001, the party held 9 of the 15 available seats in WA. Currently, they hold just 3. What do you hold responsible for that turnaround in fortunes?
I think I make 2 comments on that. Firstly, it's been over time. So for the last 10 or 12 years, the last 4 elections, we've managed to lose 1 or 2 seats at a time. Secondly, we haven't done proper or serious reviews as to the reasons for those losses. They now mount to the stage where we hold 3 out of 15, possibly 3 out of 16. And in my view, that poor performance in my state and a couple of others endangers the likelihood of ourselves returning to government in the short term. So it's a significant problem.
So down to a policy level, a couple of the things that you've been outspoken about. Firstly, the mining tax. And earlier this year you said, why on God's earth would we support a tax that raised no money? So what is it about that tax that is so bad for the party and in particular for WA?
For Western Australia, the mining tax is seen as coming from Canberra. It's seen as intrusive. It's seen as a cost. And whilst it can be seen as a cost with benefits if government raises significant revenue and spends that on the things that government does, if it fails to receive any revenue at all, people simply ask, why are you doing that? What's the value? And that has just caused an ongoing distance from a lot of people in the Western Australian community and ourselves over here in Canberra. It should never be underestimated the number of people who live in, work in, attach to, derive their living standard, their economic benefit from the mining industry and service industries attached. That's not as well understood over here as it could be. So
should the party just wave the repeal through, do you believe?
The party's made a decision. My views are public. The numbers in the Senate changed. Let the dice fall.
Sure. Okay, what about on pricing carbon? What do you make of Labor's position now and the changing position over the years?
Well, it's been a difficult debate in the Labor Party. There's been a lot of people who are strongly in favour of the carbon tax. They do so for sound reason. They do so for good reason. I'm not particularly critical of that. My attitude is always, does it achieve what you want and what are the consequences? And in terms of the issue of jobs, the issue of the impact on price, I'm not satisfied, and I'm at fault here as much as anyone else in the Federal Party. We've been able to capture and sell our message as well as we should have been able to, particularly in the outlying states where those sorts of things have major impact.
So for you the problem was more the messaging than the policy itself?
No, I don't say that. I don't say that. I say the policy was put forward, it was accepted, and it had some value. Its impact wasn't as widely understood or appreciated, and then, as a consequence of that, the sell job wasn't what we thought.
So what should Labor do in terms of pricing carbon at the next election?
If Labor wants to go down the path of a carbon tax or a variation of that or an emissions trading scheme, whatever you choose to call it at the next election, resolve that early, reduce it to a few basic propositions, delegate people to sell it and get the job done. There's no good going into an election not having done those things.
You said in your valedictory that the party which has a majority in the lower house should govern in both houses. Does that mean that the opposition in the Senate should just rubber stamp measures that have been passed in the House?
That is a strategic call as to how governments and oppositions conduct their business. I've always had the attitude that the party or parties that controls a majority on the floor of the House should be allowed to have its legislation passed in both houses. That should have applied to us in the last 5 or 6 years. It didn't. It should apply to the current government. And if we should return to the Treasury benches at the next election, the same principle should apply to us. As long as you control the numbers on the floor of the House, your legislation goes through.
So what's the point of the Senate then if they just rubber stamp legislation?
It's not a matter of the Senate, it's a matter of the parties in the Senate. And so if the Labor Party takes a position of support or opposition in the House, that should be followed in the Senate. Our job is to win government. Our job is to control a majority on the floor of the House. The Senate can accommodate that, it can review, it can improve, it can do its committee work, individuals and minor parties can have a say. That's a different proposition to who forms and who maintains government.
And does that apply, for example, to the current budget that is being blocked by your party in the Senate?
Well, I'm not aware that we're blocking the current budget. We have indicated elements of it we have problems with. I would presume that the appropriations bill will go through in due course. So I think that statement's not quite correct. But as a general proposition, if the government has the majority on the floor, it should be able to pass its legislation. Now, if the current government wants to cut pensions, get rid of family allowances, get rid of benefits, let it do so and let the people appreciate what the consequences are of electing coalition governments.
What do you think of the Labor Party's handling of the asylum seeker issue? This is another issue that has been very prominent during your time in the Senate.
It's been a difficult issue. It's been a vexed issue in the community, in the parliamentary caucus, and in the party itself. My own take, following the discussion yesterday in caucus, is that that debate is now resolved. There was opposition to the eventual outcome yesterday. It wasn't strong, it wasn't vociferous, it wasn't loud. I think we've now got to the place we should be, and that is the current position.
So was it a mistake for Kevin Rudd to roll back away from offshore processing to change the policies that John Howard had implemented?
It was. It was. It was a terrible mistake. The reasons as to why we chose to reopen that can of worms are not clear to me. It was a decision made by the new government, by the new executive. It was, of course, endorsed by caucus in due course. I think, with hindsight, we should have allowed sleeping dogs to lie.
You ended up in an unwinnable position pretty much in the WA Senate rerun because of the deal between the right-wing Shoppies Union and the left-wing United Voice Union. That put Joe Bullock at number 1, Louise Pratt at number 2. What did you think of that deal and, more broadly, the union's influence in preferences for your party?
I think over many years the trade union movement and individual unions have made a significant contribution to the Labor Party. Generally they've been staffed and worked in them decent people, thoughtful people, people who had a broader vision. I'm not so sure that is the dominant cast of mind these days. I do have the view that we need to democratise our processes, that the voting franchise should be extended, and that the power of one or two people to determine 95% of the outcomes is simply a rotten borough system revisited.
So what are then the moments that you'll look back upon most proudly and most fondly for your time in the Senate?
I think our police... I gave some thought to this question because I thought you would ask it. I think our return to power under Mr Rudd in 2007 was a highlight. I'd been through 4 or 5 losing elections, we'd had a succession of leaders, we had been divided, and the people had rejected us for a range of reasons. Rudd came in, he was a breath of fresh air, he created new voting constituencies. The enormity of his success at that time isn't yet properly appreciated. So I think that was really the highlight of the last 20 years.
Mark Bishop, thanks for your time as a senator and here on Sky News.
Thank you very much for having me.
Politicians always at their frankest on the way out. Now, for New Zealand viewers, New Zealand News is next for you.